Hello YouTube, it's the Drunken Kobold here today with a video explaining DungeonCraft adventures. So with season 10 of DDAL, one of the biggest changes to DDAL content was that community created content from here on out going to be called Triple C got axed. This was the medium in which people could create content for conventions and have it follow, DDAL guidelines. It didn't count towards, like Dungeon Master quests, which you found like in Curse of Strahd, Storm King's Thunder, etc. But it was, officially part of DDAL. And it didn't necessarily need to be tied into the campaign setting of the season either. For instance, like Triple C content that was released during Season 9 didn't necessarily need to fit into Baldur's Gate to sit into Avernus. It just needed to be what was commissioned of the writer. Rewards back then were a bit more up to DM discretion as we progressed, into Season 7, Season 8, Season 9. Rewards kind of got limited, especially as we kind of moved into milestone leveling and fixed rewards for adventures around the release of Xanathar's Guide to Everything. But it was a little bit more up to DM discretion, and it could be published to the DM's Guild. Well, it had to be published to the DM's Guild if it was going to be published within 6 months of the convention that ran it. So you had up to 6 months to fine-tune your adventure if you were going to publish it to the DM's Guild. Now Triple C has been replaced with DungeonCraft. What is DungeonCraft? Well, let's take a look. DungeonCraft Adventures. You can create your own Dungeons & Dragons adventures for play in the Plague of Ancients campaign set in Icewind Dale, provided that you follow the guidelines provided in this document. So right off the hop, you can see that you have to have your adventure take place in Icewind Dale and be part of the Plague of Ancients campaign. Crafting a DungeonCraft adventure always begins with an established adventure seed listed below. So right now, you're not able to create your own adventure hooks. You, for instance, couldn't borrow the Avalanche from the Icewind Dale video game for your adventure seed unless it is permitted in the seeds below. These adventure seeds are permitted for use during the Plague of Ancient seasonal campaign. If you intend to publish your adventure on the Dungeon Masters Guild, it must appear for sale by August 31st, 2021. There are no exceptions to this rule. So, for instance, if you in July got commissioned to write a DungeonCraft adventure for a convention on August 1st, and, there were some issues with it during the convention that you want to fix before publishing, you have 30 days to do this. You don't have that 6-month buffer anymore. Whereas somebody who runs their adventure in January has until August 31st to publish it. They have all the time in the world to fix it. Using the adventure seeds. Each adventure seed has a set level restriction as well as assigned character rewards that your adventure can use. Your adventure can't provide character rewards above what is listed, including story awards or downtime activities. So these are the adventure seeds here, and in the bottom here you see what is allowed for if it's a 2-hour adventure and what you add if it's a 4-hour adventure, and you have your level range, which is, strictly, you have to adhere to that. So, for instance, adventure seed level range 1 through 4. If you write Awake and Afraid, it can't end at, say, level 5. Adventure seed hook. The content of your adventure should be based off this single evocative sentence. So, for instance, let's look here. A Goliath Druid has been roaming the tundra around Icewind Dale, awakening animals they come across before leaving them behind to find their own way to civilization. So you have to use this as the guidelines for your story. Or you could use any of these, but they have to be these. So, for instance, here there is no there is no avalanche. Oh, here we are. Avalanches, breaking ice, widening crevices, and other hazards can be deadly, but also reveal hidden secrets. So you could, in theory, have like an avalanche, but you couldn't have like a party that is going from one town to another, be stranded in the mountains by an avalanche as a level 1 through 4 adventure. That's just not an option. If it's a 2-hour adventure, you can include only the consumable and common item listed. If it's a 4-hour adventure, you can include the uncommon magic item listed in addition to those items listed for the 2-hour adventures. So, add Boots of the Winterlands, Potion of Healing, Pole of Angling. You can, for instance, add like a Cloak of Invisibility or something to it, or Elvish Cloak or something here, because it's just not part of the rewards. Crafting your adventure, you have your adventure duration, 2 hours or 4 hours. Now those are what they... So if you say it's a 4-hour adventure, it's supposed to be an adventure that can be completed in 4 hours reasonably. Now, of course, you have like, exceptions, like, combat took like an extra 5 rounds because everybody missed their hits, like for 4 rounds in a row. Or sometimes you have players that like to dilly-dally. I've ran 4-hour adventures from the DM's Guild that ended up taking 2 4-hour sessions because I couldn't get my players to stay focused. If that's the case, it still only counts as a 4-hour adventure. You don't say, oh, I ran it for 8 hours, so I get to run it for 8 hours. I get 8 hours worth of credit. No, you get 4 hours worth. Using creatures. You can only use creatures as designated in the appendix. These have been selected as appropriate for the location stories that comprise this season. Creatures must be used as published. They cannot be modified or reskinned for play in your adventure. So let's go down here really quickly. And we go to the appendix here. And it's actually really cool to see that, we have Volo's Guide to Monsters, we have Mordekainen's Tome of Foes, and we have Icewind Dale. Where this gets really frustrating, though, is, as you can see, we do not have the full SRD worth of monsters from the Monster Manual. And one of my biggest things that I noticed right away is that for dragons, you only have the young white dragon. You don't have adult, you don't have wormling, and you don't have ancient. This is actually really frustrating for me because when I look at Icewind Dale, I think white dragons. White dragons are a staple of Icewind Dale. And if you can write a tiered adventure that is like, they have the 5 through 10 option for tier 2, an adult white dragon is a hard encounter. It's not a deadly encounter. So it is very reasonable that the end game boss of your encounter could be an adult white dragon. And considering adult white dragons were 2 of the featured miniatures of the Icewind Dale series, you had the young adult in the booster packs, and you have the monster-sized adult that was a premium set that kind of almost like borderline is ancient. And then you even have like Arveatris, who is like a super-sized ancient. The fact that none of these dragons, like not even Arveatris is here in the Icewind Dale Rime of the Frost Maiden. She is a featured creature at 2nd level. You're not going to win if your players decide to fight her, but it'd be kind of cool if Ancient White was the option here, so that way, and like if it specifically said Arveatris, so that like Arveatris could appear before the players during their quest. So that is a little frustrating to me, is that it is so limiting on creatures. Adventure setting. The adventure can take place in any of the locations used in Icewind Dale, Rime of the Frost Maiden. These include 10 towns, the wilds of Icewind Dale, including any places of interest listed in Chapter 2 of that book, Sunblight, the Sea of Moving Ice, Grimskull, the Regid Glacier, Caves of Hunger, and the Necropolis of Ythryn. For instance here, East Haven is the setting here for burrowing burrowers. A tribe of rather enterprising kobolds have been burrowing through the ice into the basements of homes in East Haven, plundering them of food and valuables and stealing them away before the owners are any wiser. So it could take place in East Haven. You could, in theory, create a small dungeon just off of East Haven that these kobolds have created, like a makeshift dungeon. You could throw a young white dragon as like their like overlord at the end of the dungeon as your BBEG for the one shot. But you couldn't, for instance, use like Kaldahar or the Vale of Shadows or any of the other settings of Icewind Dale that aren't in the book. I hate this word. Canonical elements. It's important to note that your adventure can't feature the death of NPCs or the destruction of locations featured in Icewind Dale: Rime of the Frost Maiden, or any canonical D&D reference for that matter. So, for instance, even if Kaldahar was listed here, it couldn't be destroyed. You could, in theory, have like East Haven having been completely leveled from the Charlatan dragon attack. I'm sure you'd be allowed to do that, since the Charlatan dragon does in canon level East Haven, and East Haven's trying to rebuild. But that one's kind of iffy, because like it'd be really nice if it specifically said locations that are potentially destroyed by the Charlatan dragon in Icewind Dale: The Rime of the Frost Maiden are allowed to be destroyed at the start of your adventure. Then you have your fine print. These are like just some rules. Please include any blocks for any creature you use in your adventure that doesn't appear in the monster manual. So, for instance, if you use Yeti Tyke, you're going to have to copy that stat block. There are stat block things on the DM's Guild you can use, but you do have to like copy that out or photocopy it and crop it and place it in so that way it can be used. Adventure League content managers don't need to review or approve your adventure for you to run or publish it. I absolutely love that. Create the Triple C. It required a lot of approval process, and sometimes adjusting your Triple C adventure to be approved was a pain in the butt. At your option, you can publish your adventure on the Dungeon Masters Guild. Until published, only the authors, maximum 2 individuals, can run the adventure. So if, for instance, me and my friend Joe Stevens decides, hey, we're going to write this adventure, we can write it, we can run it for this convention, and then we publish it. Until we actually publish it, only him and I can run it, and we can't bring like a third party on board. So say we bring his son Joe Stevens Jr. on board to help write. Joe Stevens Jr. can't be credited as an author, and he cannot run the adventure. When published on Dungeon Masters Guild, your adventure must use the DC-PoA code to identify as a DungeonCraft adventure. So, for instance, one of the things that they do with season adventures is you will see DDAL-10, and then you will see like 000, like to show that it's like the kind of like the pilot adventure, or 001 to show that, or even just 01 to show that it is the first adventure in like this series of like 10 to 13 adventures. So your thing must say DC-PoA, and it can't like have like a number attached to it, so it can't like say 01 to indicate that like if you're writing like 10 of these, that it's part of like a series. So it would just say like DC-PoA, and then you would write your seed titles. So there's going to be a lot of the warmest, like DC-PoA. There's going to be a lot of the warmest day. There's going to be a lot of the murder Muttering Gnome that are going to be on the DM's Guild, and that's just the way that is. All DungeonCraft adventures published on the DM's Guild must abide to the rules provided by the DM's Guild in terms of content that can be published in that marketplace. So there is like a lot of rules, like you can't have like for instance like anti-LGBTQ content in your book. You can't have racist content in your book. And that's just common sense, but and that just applies to like all DDAL adventures, so and DM's Guild adventures. So the fact that this is here is just kind of like doubling down on that. Hey, behave yourself when you're writing. And then this is here saying that that Wizards of the Coast and the DM's Guild have the right to remove your content at any time they choose, and that they can actually prohibit you from writing future DungeonCraft content. So these are just some of the adventure seeds. You have tier 1, level 1 through 4. I believe I counted 15 of them. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Yeah, okay. And then you have your tier 2 levels 5 through 10. There are a few less options here. And you have your item rewards. So what are my thoughts on this DungeonCraft? I like that, like I said, the DungeonCraft doesn't need to go through the rigorous process to get approved for publishing that CCC did. But I don't like that the trade-off is that it is so limited in what you can create. I like that DungeonCraft allows non-SRD content from Volos, from Mordecaians, and from like the book of the season, in this case, Icewind Dale. But the fact that we don't have access to the entire SRD that we do when we're creating non-DDAL content is kind of disappointing. Another downside is that we are limited to the campaign setting of the season. You cannot write a DungeonCraft adventure for Baldur's Gate Descent into Avernus now. You just can't. Once August 31st rolls around, you cannot write DungeonCraft for Icewind Dale. The other thing I don't like is that you're forced down like a really narrow rabbit hole of what you can write about. Like, for instance, the burrowing burrowers, tongue twisters, I hate them. You can't, like you have to stick to that guideline. Like, of course, you can throw in like your young white dragon at the end if you want, or you can throw in a choker as your BBEG for your level 1 through 4, but you're forced that the kobolds are breaking into the basements and cleaning them out. You can't have them like jumping through the shop windows like rogues and stealing everything off the shelves. So the fact that it is very limited on what your opening topic can be is very frustrating in my opinion. And lastly, another big flaw of DDAL is that you can't, for instance, say, okay, I'm going to write an adventure for you. Do you know the way to Lonely Wood, The Warmest Day, Snipe Hunt, and I'd like to make a return, please. Put them all in one PDF. Your players choose which level 1 through 4 tier 1 adventure they're going to play, and then it leads into a level 5 through 10 tier 2 adventure, or even 2 of them that your players again choose from. I find that very frustrating because you're now playing. You could, for instance, write a mini module for tier 1 through 2 play, and give your players some choice, but instead you're actually going to have to publish all of these separately if you so desire to publish them. You can't publish them as so from say 10 o'clock until 2 o'clock, we're going to have a tier 1 adventure. Players choose which one they play. It's right here in this PDF booklet. You actually have to buy them all separately. And that to me is just slightly frustrating in my opinion. All in all, DungeonCraft. Oh, and one thing I wanted to point out really quickly. Oh, that's Tasha's. One thing I wanted to point out really quickly is all content of DungeonCraft has to have this logo on the cover, as well as your DM's Guild logo, and you can't like alter this. So, like, say your cover has like a lot of black, and this isn't gonna stand out for shit. You can't alter this into like a blue logo to make it stand out. So that's also a little frustrating in my opinion. But all in all, DungeonCraft does have a lot of potential if it gives more freedom to the writers. But right now, like, I wouldn't consider writing for DungeonCraft like I did Triple C, simply because it's like far too prohibitive. Like, why am I going to write for something that forces that, as a writer, railroads me? Like, we already don't like when DMs railroad players, so why are we railroading the DMs? So yeah, that is my analysis of DungeonCraft. I just want to quickly throw out that the Tasha's Cauldron of Everything guidelines have been finalized for season 10. They have been for about a month now. So when you are writing for DungeonCraft, you do got to take Tasha's Cauldron of Everything into consideration. Everything that is in Tasha's Cauldron of Everything in terms of player options, DMs don't have the discretion to allow or disallow these options. So, for instance, if you choose, so say you choose a rogue as a player, and you choose Tasha's Cauldron of Everything to be your +1, you get steady aim. The DM cannot say, no, you do not get steady aim. I get that you're using Tasha's as your +1. You can't do that. So, the fact that Tasha's is in play for DungeonCraft, and you can't as a DM running DungeonCraft say, hey, no, we're not going to allow that part of Tasha's and all that. Kind of disappointing. But the one reason I want to bring this up here is right here is group chapter 2 group patrons. The rules found here aren't used unless the DM is specifically instructed to do so by the adventure. So, for instance, the DM can't just say, hey, we're playing this. You have a group patron, though. It has to be there. Chapter 4, Dungeon Master's Tools. Dungeon Master's Tools can be used, can use these rules except as noted below. Sidekicks. The rules found here aren't used unless the DM is specifically instructed to do so by the adventure. And environmental hazards. So if you're kind of setting something up so that the DM wants to use, so that the DM will want to use a sidekick or want to use an environmental hazard, you got to specifically note it in your adventure so that way you are following the Tasha's Cauldron of Everything guidance. Other than that, that is everything. Let me know how you feel about DungeonCraft in the comments down below. Like I said, personally, I'm not the biggest fan of it, but I do think it has a lot of potential to be better as it grows. In the meantime, cheers, and may the rolls be with you.